Part 73. A Middle School Cartoonist. Author, Mao Do Sde Mao. Chapter 723. Huh? What did you say, Chang? Yoshida, who was originally sitting on a chair in the editor's headquarters, immediately jumped up from his seat after hearing the request of a second-year cartoonist on the phone and ignored it. Colleagues around him looked at him curiously, and in a tone full of amazement, they repeatedly confirmed to Takahashi Makoto on the other side of the phone, "Chang, are you sure what you said? Hello? Hello? Phew. That Shuyunobu cartoonist actually hangs up. My phone. Hey, familiar cat Yoshida-san, is your master calling you again?" Yujiro didn't notice Yoshida's face and asked in a joking tone. No, even if Yujiro noticed Yoshida's face, Yujiro might also use this tone to tease your colleagues. If you don't do something, you won't die. Yujiro, why don't you understand? After Yoshida said angrily, he grabbed Yuichiro's arm and made a pose of "I will kill you even if I die," dragged into hell with a gloomy expression. "I'm still worried about what Cheng asked me to do just now. It just so happens that if you have Yuichiro together, I should be able to succeed." Hey, Yoshida-san, are you taking me there? You'll know when you get there. Under the gazes of their colleagues, the two most powerful editors on the editorial side of the weekly magazine left the office area holding hands like good friends. Looking at the door number of the office in front of him, Yujiro immediately stopped Yoshida from knocking on the door, and then quickly pulled Yoshida to the reception room aside, clasped his hands and said, "Yoshida-san, if you are still worried about if you were angry about what happened just now, I apologize. So, there is no need to come to the editor-in-chief for that kind of thing, right?" Yujiro, it's too late to apologize now. Although he noticed that Yuichiro seemed to have misunderstood something, Yoshida did not immediately expose it and explain. Rather, he continued to mislead Yujiro. Human beings always like to go further and further down the road of seeking death. Only when they are truly facing death will they regret everything they have done, so Yuichiro, it's useless to talk more. Yoshida-san, I've already apologized, what else do you want? After Yoshida knocked on the editor-in-chief's office door, even though he begged for mercy to no avail, Yujiro was still making the final struggle. "I'll wait for you at worst. Invite you to dinner." Yujiro, do you think that I, like you, can just throw away a meal? Regarding Yujiro's answer, Yoshida, the editor-in-chief of a certain weekly magazine, and a certain middle-level cartoonist under his command, were very excited. Enjoy the pleasure brought by the other person's pleading. Not to mention that inviting someone to dinner requires at least 3 visits to the thatched cottage. Ahem, in short, the reason why I brought you to see the editor-in-chief is of course because it has something to do with you. Is it related to me? Yujiro expressed doubts about Yoshida's answer. To be precise, it has something to do with Mr. Eiji Niizuma, because he recalled what a middle-class manga artist said on the phone just now. Yoshida's originally very pleasant mood could no longer be maintained at this moment, so, Yoshida in dark-bellied and poisonous mode appears. Because the next chapter of Cheng's manga Steins Gate can also be said to be the final serialization, some things need to be involved in the next serialization of the manga by Eiji Niizuma, so naturally, as the editor-in-chief, you regarding, Mr. Yujiro, the editor-in-chief who only has the level of mortal wisdom, can you understand my explanation? Huh? The comic Steins Gate will end in the next chapter. After suddenly learning this explosive news from Yoshida's mouth, Yujiro was a little unbelievable, but looking at Yoshida's serious expression, Yujiro realized that the other party seemed not lying. But that's exactly what happened. Here comes the problem. Wait. By the way, why does the manga draft of the final episode of the manga Steins Gate involve Shinzuma-kun's next manga series? Yujiro, do you want to know? Yoshida raised his eyebrows and directly opened the door of the editor-in-chief's office. Then let's come in together. This matter is no longer something that our editor-in-chief can solve. This is basically the situation. Yoshida, who had clearly analyzed the ins and outs of the incident, looked at the editor-in-chief of the bottle whose expression had not changed at all, and then looked at the person next to him with an expression of "I will not accept or approve of this kind of behavior." Yujiro, after pondering for a moment, asked softly, "Editor-in-chief, may I ask what's next?" How could such a thing be allowed? Although speaking before the editor-in-chief has spoken is considered a very transgressive act, but Yujiro no longer cares. In order to satisfy the serialization of the last chapter of the manga Steins Gate, I chose to have the two cartoonists Shinzuma-kun and Hiramaru-sensei suspend the serialization of the manga for one issue. Yoshida-san, how do you think the editor-in-chief could agree to such a thing? So, I am also very helpless, as the person who was accused by his colleagues. Yoshida spread his hands in understanding and said in a helpless tone, I also think this kind of thing is ridiculous, but the actual situation is, comics. The content of the last chapter of Steins Gate far exceeds the number of normal serialized comic manuscripts. If calculated based on the standard number of pages, it is probably close to 3 chapters. So what? In order to allow the content of the last chapter of the manga Steins Gate to be serialized normally, Yoshida-san, you actually agreed with the cartoonist's ridiculous opinion of taking over other cartoonists for serialization, Yujiro said in a tone of voice he became a little excited. If he hadn't been in the editor-in-chief's office, perhaps this effeminate-looking editor-in-chief of the weekly would have grabbed Yoshida's collar with both hands and entered the roaring accountability mode while speaking. Let's not talk about what a selfish act this is. Why did the mangaka Shoin-kuma choose to occupy the serials of Shinzuma-kun and Hiramaru-kun, instead of others? Yujiro, you should actually know some information, right? Yoshida explained helplessly. Teacher Eiji Nizuma and Aiken are allies. As for Hiramaru-kun, he always obeys Aiken's words. When that guy has an excuse not to serialize, he will naturally agree. Hiramaru-sensei will agree. Well, that makes sense. Recalling a comic in a recent weekly magazine that readers both love and hate, Yuichiro calmed down his anger slightly and patted Yoshida on the shoulder sympathetically. But what Shinzuma-kun says, it is absolutely impossible to agree to Shinzuma-kun's words. Yujiro, in fact, Mr. Eiji Shinzuma has already agreed. Yoshida's face suddenly became serious, and he bowed deeply to the editor-in-chief of the bottle, and said in a sincere tone, so, editor-in-chief, please promise Aiken this very special unreasonable request. Reason, the face of the editor-in-chief of the bottle did not change at all, he just asked indifferently, he is indeed the boss of the editorial side of the weekly? Ever since Cheng debuted, I have been accompanying him as the editor-in-chief to this day. Yoshida looked a little dazed. At this time, Yoshida must be recalling every detail of his time with a certain middle-class cartoonist. Now Cheng has said that the comic Steins Gate will be his last comic, so, as the editor-in-chief, I plead with you, the editor-in-chief, and hope that you will satisfy Cheng's request. The last unreasonable and willful request. Is it impossible to persuade any more? After a long silence, the editor-in-chief of Bottle asked quietly. Yes, Cheng's determination is very firm. Yoshida bowed to the bottle editor again, so, I beg you, editor-in-chief. A certain cat hasn't been home for almost a week and is crazy busy. After being exposed to the wind and sun, I have successfully changed my skin color. Phew, a certain cat has become a black cat. A middle school cartoonist. Author, Mao Do Sde Mao. Chapter 724. The editor-in-chief of Bottle finally agreed to Yoshida. No, it should be said that he agreed to the request conveyed by a certain second-level cartoonist to his editor-in-chief, and agreed to make the finale of the comic Steins Gate close to the length of 3 chapters in the next issue of the weekly magazine. Content. This is actually understandable. After all, the comic Steins Gate is the last comic by the cartoonist Shoin Jiajhen. As a weekly that has cooperated with a certain middle-class cartoonist for many years, the weekly will agree to such a willful request. I'm afraid those who think too much are still lucky. For example, they imagine that a certain middle-level cartoonist will one day in the future reincarnate into Kwankai cartoonist Phoenix Academy Murama and start a new comic series again. As for other cartoonists complaining about privileges. Snort. Sorry, I have to at least reach the status of a middle-class cartoonist in a weekly magazine first. As the editor-in-chief of AG Shinzuma, Yujiro felt that the request of a certain middle-class cartoonist was too willful at first, and the editor-in-chief would not agree to such an unreasonable request. However, when the editor-in-chief Bottle decided to agree, he did not. There was no vocal objection. Because the editor-in-chief of Bottle only agreed to serialize nearly 3 chapters of the manga Steins Gate in the next issue of the weekly magazine. He did not agree to squeeze out the manga originally belonging to A.G. Arizuma and Little Sea Otter, as Yoshida said. However, before the editor-in-chief of Bottle made the final decision, he received a phone call. It was this call of less than a minute that made the editor-in-chief of Bottle fully agree to what Yoshida had relayed about a certain middle-class cartoonist. Require. Editor-in-chief, wait a minute. Yujiro looked at the Bottle editor in disbelief. You just said that when the next issue of the weekly magazine is serialized, not only Mr. Hiramaru, but also Shinzuma-kun serial, come out to Master Jigen from the Phoenix Academy. Well, that's indeed my decision. The editor-in-chief of Bottle dragged his chin with his hands, making the 2 editors present unable to see his eyes clearly, perhaps because of the reflection. I'm sorry that this is unacceptable. Yujiro took a deep breath and stared at the editor-in-chief of the Bottle with a serious expression. It's not that I don't agree with serializing the very long storyline of the comic Steins Gate in one go, but why do you want Mr. Hiramaru and Mr. Shinzuma to accommodate Mr. Kuma of the Phoenix Academy? Nowadays, both Mr. Hiramaru and Mr. Shinzuma's comics are very popular in the weekly. I believe you, the editor-in-chief, should know this too. Bar. The implication of Yujiro's words is that if we want to squeeze out 2 serialized comics, we absolutely cannot choose comics from 2 popular cartoonists, A.G. Naizuma and Kobe Otter. Yujiro, of course I know what you are saying. After stopping Yujiro, who wanted to continue speaking to analyze the stakes, the Bottle editor's expressionless face showed a hint of helplessness. If possible, I would not want to, but it's too late. Too late, compared to Yujiro, who was a little confused. Yoshida raised his eyebrows thoughtfully. That phone call just now, it was the manga artist Naizuma AG that you are responsible for, Yuichiro. After the editor-in-chief of Bottle just said this, he did not disclose the content of the call between the 2, but let out a long sigh, quite helpless. He sighed with emotion. You are a talented cartoonist, but you are really, humph. This matter has been decided like this. Under the expulsion order and the majestic gaze of the editor-in-chief of Bottle, Yoshida immediately grabbed Yujiro, who originally wanted to continue arguing with the editor-in-chief, and quickly left the office. Half an hour later, Yoshida, who was full of curiosity, and Yujiro, who was full of resentment and unwillingness, came to the stronghold of a certain middle-class cartoonist. Speaking of Chen, you were able to convince Hiramaru-kun to suspend the serialization of 1 issue. I can roughly guess the method you used. Yoshida has a very thorough understanding of the temperament and integrity of the cartoonist under his command. But as for teacher A.G. Naizuma, Chen, how on earth did you convince him? That's right, the reason why Naizuma AG called the editor-in-chief of the Bottle was naturally because he was bewitched by a certain middle-class cartoonist. This is the reason Yujiro has always believed in, and it is also the reason this hard-spoken and soft-hearted editor insists on. And the reason why Yoshida brought Yujiro to find Takahashi Makoto was precisely to find out the truth of everything. Of course, for Yoshida, perhaps it was more to satisfy his curiosity. I can convince the King of Black Flame. Isn't this difficult to understand? A certain second-grade cartoonist did not pause the brush in his hand. Instead, in a strange tone, he began to sigh to the 2 editors. I think that compared to persuading the King of Black Flame, persuading the Little Sea Otter is a truly difficult task. No, With Hirameru-kun's character, once he hears that he can suspend publication, even if it just stops serializing for a week. Yoshida didn't know what bad memories he remembered, and said with a murderous look on his face, "That guy also I will definitely agree at the first opportunity." Tisk, 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 my beloved cat, do you think you are so confident? A middle-grade cartoonist sneered, raised his head and looked at his editor. You know, when I persuaded the little sea otter, but he was rejected the first time. Huh? Refuse. This is impossible. Yoshida felt that the little sea otter mentioned by a certain middle-class cartoonist at this moment was definitely not the Hirameru-kun he usually knew. My beloved cat, do you know what that guy's first reaction was after I opened my mouth to persuade the little sea otter? A certain second-grade cartoonist showed a long-lost joyful smile on his face and said in a malicious tone. After that guy refused, he asked me if this was a new way of testing that my beloved cat came up with. Ha ha ha. My beloved cat, I'm super curious now, you guy, what the hell, what had he done to the little sea otter that left that guy so deeply frightened? Yoshida doesn't know whether he should feel happy or sad at this time. Everything is fine with Hirameru-sensei. Yujiro, who was talking silently on the side, finally couldn't help but intervene in the conversation between a middle-class cartoonist and the editor-in-chief of a weekly magazine. After taking a deep breath, Yujiro he looked at a certain middle school manga artist seriously and asked, "Teacher Kumamoto from the Phoenix Academy, what I want to know now is, how on earth did you persuade Shinzuma-kun?" "The method is very simple, I just threatened the king of Black Flame." A certain middle-level cartoonist looked at Yujiro, who looked slightly excited, and deliberately added fuel to the fire and emphasized the sound of a certain word, as if to emphasize the illegal means you used. "Is it really a threat?" Yujiro looked a little indignant. He stared at a certain middle-level cartoonist for a long time, then turned to his colleague Yoshida and said, "That's right, I just said that with my new wife with your character. How could you agree to stop serializing, Yoshida-san? I will tell the editor-in-chief truthfully about this." "Wait a minute, Yujiro." After stopping Yujiro, who was about to get up and leave, Yoshida looked at a certain middle-class cartoonist with a headache, sighed helplessly, and said with a wry smile, "Hey, Cheng, at this time, don't be kidding me. Isn't that what you mean by threat? King of Black Flame, if you want to truly feel the power of the comic Steins Gate, then give up the qualification to serialize the next chapter. I will let you truly understand what it means. You have absolutely no idea about the layout of the comic, you know." That's what I said at the time. A certain middle-level cartoonist seemed to enjoy Yujiro's expression of disbelief, and joked with a malicious smile, "Although it sounds more like a request. But in terms of nature, it is also a threat." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. A middle school cartoonist. Author, Mao Do Sde Mao. Chapter 725. Without wings that can soar freely in the sky, without fangs and claws that can hunt and kill real objects, humans are born weak. However, it is such weak people who have continued civilization in wars, and have continued to multiply from ancient times to the present day without dying out. Although humans are born weak, at the critical moment, there are always some people who, contrary to their previous cowardice and weakness, show a resolute and courageous side and burst out with powerful strength, or the so-called heart of the strong. So the continuation of mankind is not accidental, but inevitable. In the manga Steins Gate, the male protagonist Okabe Rintaro is such a human. From the beginning of the manga, Rintaro, who is hopeless at the end of the second year of middle school, is not like the protagonists in other manga, who have something to make readers like, at least before the real plot of the manga begins. Rintaro's severe second year of middle school setting can only make readers feel pleasure from his clumsy words and deeds like a clown to please the audience. It is said that the audience who laugh at the clown's performance on the stage, in a sense, are like a certain Mapo priest, opening the door to the new world of joy in their hearts. Well, let's not discuss the despicable degree of human nature here for the time being. But when the manga Steins Gate entered the plot of God's Turn, all of Rentero's extremely second-rate words and deeds, as well as all the persecution delusions he had in the past, gradually became a reality. Perhaps most readers will be fascinated by the way the manga plot unfolds when they first see such a plot turn, and rarely pay attention to Rentero's transformation, at least when they first observe the manga. In the early stages of research and development, Rentero received threatening emails. At that time, Rentero just had a bad feeling, and that mysterious ominous premonition was soon diluted by the success and joy brought by the research. When Mayuri died in front of Rentero for the first time, Rentero was truly terrified. However, at that time, Rentero was only stimulated by Mayuri's death and witnessed the fear of the passing of life, not the fear of I actually developed such a terrifying machine. When Rentero performed time jumps again and again to save Mayuri, and struggled in despair again and again in failure, Rentero finally understood his weakness and realized his incompetence in the seemingly endless cycle. Lessons without pain are meaningless, because people will not gain without sacrifice. However, when you overcome this pain, you will gain a strong heart that will not succumb to anything. Yes, a heart like steel. Just as the conclusion of the final chapter of Full Metal Alchemist said, after experiencing powerlessness, despair, and decadence again and again, Rentero has a resolute and courageous heart of steel. Therefore, when faced with the difficult choice of Mayuri and the assistant can only choose one, although Rentero struggled several times and hesitated again and again, when he had to make the final choice, he was still able to muster up the courage to choose and accept the consequences that followed. From this point alone, Rentero has indeed changed. Although he still speaks meaningless words, as the only protagonist who can retain his memory in the Change of the World line, behind the horse cry, there is a steel heart that can endure the pain. The final episode of the manga Steins Gate is the stage to witness Rentero's resolute and courageous side. From the failed action of saving the Tsundere assistant, Rentero, who was originally desperate, received help from his future self. Under the prompting of his future self, he finally found a way to save the Tsundere assistant. There is no need to change the established facts, but try to deceive. Deceive yourself who witnessed the whole incident at that time, deceive the whole world. Whether it is a comic or a novel, the moment that can make the observer's blood boil the most is the moment when the protagonist counterattacks from despair and darkness to the light. So, when Yoshida saw that Rentero finally found a way to save the arrogant assistant in the comic manuscript, he couldn't help but shout out excitedly. Of course, because of the behavior of suddenly making a sound to scare a certain Chuyuni cartoonist, Yoshida had to accept some suggestions full of bad taste from a certain Chuyuni cartoonist, and atone for his sins by letting the other party get pleasure. There are still some unfinished comics of Steins Gate in his hand, but Yoshida is not in a hurry to continue reading. Instead, he stares at a certain Chuyuni cartoonist who is writing and drawing on the table with a look of surprise. My beloved cat, is there something wrong? Considering that I am in a good mood today, approved. Although the Chuyuni cartoonist did not look up, he could feel Yoshida's suspicious eyes. Don't underestimate the demon god Hao Winkuma who has mastered intuition. This is not your style, Chang. Yoshida said this after hesitating for a long time. Huh? My beloved cat, what are you talking about? What's not my style? A certain Chuyunibaku manga artist finally stopped what he was doing, looked up at Yoshida, and asked in confusion, although I admit that your bizarre way of asking questions did successfully divert my attention, but my beloved cat, you should understand what I said, right? If you don't have a reasonable explanation, I will consider extending your suspension time today. The ending of the manga Steins Gate is a happy ending for everyone, right? Although he was asking a certain Chuyunibaku manga artist again, Yoshida's tone was quite firm. Although I haven't seen the ending yet, according to your previous foreshadowing, The ending should be that Rentaro successfully rescued his assistant. So, my beloved cat, are you showing off your poor IQ? A certain Chuyunabaku manga artist waved his hand to interrupt the other party and mocked him bluntly. By the way, the plot of the last episode has almost been finished, and my beloved cat, you actually only figured out the ending now. It is indeed a happy ending. Yoshida heard that the Chuyunabaku manga artist did not deny it, and a complicated look appeared on his face. He sighed again. It's really not like Aiken's style. According to your personality, Aiken, wouldn't the ending be the kind of depressing type that asks readers to send razor blades? You actually designed a happy ending. Hey, my beloved cat, I can't pretend that I didn't hear this. A certain Chuyunabaku manga artist was quite dissatisfied with Yoshida's obvious cognitive impairment. What do you mean by I can actually design a happy ending? Is there anything wrong with me drawing like this? Of course, Yoshida said as if it was a matter of course, which made a certain Chuyunabaku manga artist very angry. Aiken, you have serialized so many crazy and hateful plots, and now you suddenly serialize a comic with a happy ending. Don't you think this is very inconsistent? A crazy person like you suddenly has a conscience and wants to whitewash, humph. It's just wishful thinking. In fact, what Yoshida wanted to say was originally supposed to be like this. But considering the strength and bad taste of a certain Chuyunabaku manga artist, the editor-in-chief of a certain weekly magazine decisively chose a more euphemistic way of expression. A middle school cartoonist. Author, Mao Do Sde Mao. Chapter 726. It is said that the content of next week's chapter will be the final chapter of the manga Steins Gate. Yeah, Hattori-san, I already know this news. Hearing this slightly delayed information, the yellow-haired glasses man in the best friend group of Yashiro Mumanjai looked calm. Although I am a little unwilling, we lost again this time. The plot design of the middle and late stages of the manga Steins Gate is really wonderful. Yes, Hattori, the editor-in-chief of the weekly magazine on the other end of the phone, hesitated for a moment, and finally couldn't help asking, then Takagi-kun, do you know the news about Mr. Hawinkuma? What news? To be honest, Hattori-san, Aiken, wouldn't he go to your editorial department to make trouble again, recalling that a certain middle school cartoonist once asked the editor of the weekly magazine the things he did were enough to be called black history. The man with yellow hair and glasses looked at each other and couldn't help but smile. He curiously asked his editor-in-chief of the weekly editorial side, could it be like last time, because he was bored after quickly completing the comic manuscript, and ran to the editor-in-chief for some spiritual guidance. No, Editor Hattori, who is known as a good guy in the weekly editorial side, felt a little frustrated at this moment. What? That guy Cheng this time. However, the man with yellow hair and glasses seemed to enjoy the frustrated tone of his editor-in-chief Hattori, and what's worse, in order to further pursue this pleasure enjoyment, the man with yellow hair and glasses completely ignored the frustration of his editor-in-chief and began to recall what a certain middle school cartoonist had done. Could it be like the time in early July, when they brought a bunch of cats and dogs to besiege the weekly editorial department? Takagi-kun, I hesitated again and again, and decided to tell you this news. After taking a deep breath, the Hattori editor's tone became a little serious, and he said a piece of news that caught the yellow-haired glasses guy on the other end of the phone off guard. The cartoonist Hawinkuma has decided to retire after the serialization of the manga Steins Gate is finished. Huh? Hattori-san, are you kidding me? The yellow-haired glasses guy showed an unbelievable look on his face, and he didn't care whether his surprised tone would disturb his good friend. Aiken, that guy actually, Hattori-san, are you sure that Aiken? It is said that only the editor-in-chief and several responsible editors know this news. As if knowing what the yellow-haired glasses wanted to ask, the editor Hattori interrupted the yellow-haired glasses' unspoken words. The reason why I told you this news is, on the one hand, because you have always been targeting Mr. Hawinkuma, on the other hand. You want us to get some information from Aiken, right? The yellow-haired glasses waved to his good friend who was listening attentively beside him, signaling him not to speak in a hurry, and then said in a speculative tone, whether it is to persuade Aiken to continue serialization or to confirm the accuracy of the news, compared with the identity of responsible editor or editor-in-chief, our identity as cartoonists seems to be more convenient. The editorial department does not rule out such an idea. Without denying the yellow-haired glasses speculation, the editor Hattori seemed very calm, but I think whether it is Mashiro-kun or Takagi-kun, you must not be able to accept the sudden decision of Howin-kuma to retire. Of course, after looking at each other with the good friend, the two good friends shouted in unison without paying attention to the editor Hattori on the other end of the phone. So, this is why you came. Looking at the cartoonists kneeling in front of him, a certain Chuyunabaku cartoonist covered his head with a headache. The King of Black Flame is fine. I didn't expect that the good friend group also has the silver-haired brother Fukuda. You are actually such easily instigated humans. Huh? Ah-Cheng, do you think that with just Yujiro, that stupid coward, you can instigate and instruct me? The silver-haired brother pouted unhappily. I just don't like your attitude and approach. The reason why the silver-haired brother Fukuda came here is very simple and direct, hoping that a certain Chuyunabaku cartoonist will give up the idea of retiring after finishing this comic that is abhorrent to both humans and gods. For the silver-haired young man Fukuda, a certain Chuyuni cartoonist and Eiji Nazuma are both enemies he wants to defeat, and are also the goals he has been pursuing for a long time. However, now, a certain Chuyuni cartoonist is going to retire after completing the serialization of the manga Steins Gate, and it ends in a nearly crushing way. In short, Takahashi Makoto, you want to run away after pretending to be something. The silver-haired young man Fukuda said that he absolutely cannot tolerate such a thing. Excuse me, except for the King of Black Flame, the level of everyone here is, his eyes swept through the cartoonists present one by one, including his own allies, his own disciples, the kind who think they are, his own believers, the kind who have been trained, adjusted, many times, and some who set themselves as archenemies without authorization. A certain Chuyuni cartoonist showed a disdainful smile on his face, and even when facing the King of Black Flame, humph. You guys, you can't even beat Krypton Gold players, but you actually want to challenge cheating players across levels. Who gave you the courage to have mysterious confidence? Ahahaha, as expected, all of us combined are no match for Mr. Howin-kuma. After being mocked by a certain Chuyunibu cartoonist, perhaps only Eiji Nazuma could remain optimistic? Looking at his best friend, Yashiro Mumanai, who was full of black lines on his face, Jinghe River who was silent, and the silver-haired boy Fukuda who was in a tsundere state, Eiji Nazuma decisively turned his gaze to the little sea otter who had not spoken since entering the door. So, for Mr. Howin-kuma's decision to give up the profession of cartoonist, Mr. Hiramaru, don't you have anything to say? If you really want to say something. After hesitating for a moment, the little sea otter clasped his fists and said with envy, I envy Mr. Howin-kuma very much. Envy, hey, Yashiro Mumanai and the silver-haired boy Fukuda exclaimed in unison, and immediately stared at the little sea otter with eyes that there is a traitor among us. Without the pressure of mortgage and car loan, and without having to work all night to finish the comics, this is exactly the life I have always dreamed of and longed for, the little otter said, hugging Takahashi Makoto's thigh, like a devout believer seeing a god. Lord Fengguangai Yuan-kuma, please point out the direction for me to move forward and tell me how to live freely like you. Little otter, dreaming is the farthest distance from understanding. After gently pulling the little otter up, a middle school manga artist sighed with melancholy, it's not that I want to quit, but, that's right, all of this is actually the choice of Steins Gate. The good friends Yashiro and Mumenjai looked at each other, and the corners of their mouths began to twitch at a high synchronization rate. The choice of Steins Gate, sure enough, this is the explanation, borrowing, again. After the typhoon, the rain has subsided, so it is the annual construction golden period again. To be honest, UV allergies are really uncomfortable. In short, I have been busy with work recently, so please forgive me for the update. A middle school cartoonist. Author, Mao Do Sde Mao. Chapter 727. The battle of persuading a certain middle-class cartoonist, which gathered many forces from the cartoonist's side, ended in failure. There is no way around this. Although there are many people on the cartoonist's side, sometimes the large number of people does not necessarily bring an advantage, because the team is so large, one or two teammates who are lagging behind are mixed in. This phenomenon is quite common in human society. There is no doubt that Little Sea Otter and the King of Black Flame are a drag on the cartoonist's side. No, it shouldn't be said to be a drag. To be precise, it was these two people who were the culprits who really caused the failure of the cartoonist's side operation. Of course, more importantly, even though humans are social creatures, it is difficult to establish a so-called trust relationship between two different individuals. Wherever there are people, there will be rivers and lakes. This statement is actually not accurate. The real reason is that the 7 deadly sins have always given rise to infighting between people. Just like now. If it were the usual teacher Eiji Izuma, he would definitely be the first one to persuade Cheng today. Just after leaving the room, a certain yellow-haired glasses man who failed to successfully persuade a certain middle-grade cartoonist immediately took the full of doubts. He questioned his new wife Eiji, who had just been a comrade in arms. But teacher Nyaizuma Eiji, your performance today, speaking of Nyaizuma-kun, do you know any inside information? For example, what will Aiken do next? For example, what will Aiken do next? Action, or something like that. I'm sorry to say it, but I don't know it. Although Eiji Nyaizuma is telling the truth, it's obvious, the truth sometimes may not be able to win the trust of human beings due to persecution, delusion and suspicious nature composed species. Therefore, Nyaizuma Eiji's helpless explanation was all true. In exchange, of course, the cartoonist and the others looked at him with suspicion and disbelief. Hey, Nyaizuma-kun, we are competitors and partners, right? The silver-haired brother Fukuda grabbed Nyaizuma Eiji's neck with a ferocious smile on his face. Since we don't have a competitive relationship now, then we should be considered companions, right? Shouldn't companions be honest with each other and have nothing to hide? But I really don't know. Eiji Nyaizuma tried to struggle several times, but found that he could not break free from the restraints of the silver-haired brother Fukuda, and said rather helplessly, to be honest, the Phoenix Academy is fierce. What the real teacher did was really cunning. Cunning, everyone on the side of the cartoonist, except for the Little Sea Otter, pondered thoughtfully for a moment, and then nodded unanimously in agreement. Since that guy Cheng has decided to give up his career as a cartoonist, do we need to do anything? A certain man with yellow hair and glasses held his chin and thought for a moment before speaking to the colleagues around him who were cartoonists. He suggested, I still feel a little unhappy about letting this guy Aiken leave so decisively. I agree, the silver-haired boy Fusion seemed to have thought of something, and a malicious smile appeared on his face. I second the proposal. The same is true for Eiji, the new wife. Isn't this a bit bad? The only one who dares to speak like this at this time is the Little Sea Otter, who has always believed in a certain middle-class cartoonist as a god. I will let the teacher witness my growth. Jing Hehe's tone was calm, but the will in it cannot be underestimated. Yoshi, then let's go to our place to discuss it now. The good friends Yachen Mumanjai looked at each other and suggested in unison. The cartoonists, who were all in high spirits, did not notice a certain black cat sitting on the trash can next to them, silently observing everything. I see, a certain second-grade cartoonist gently stroked the black cat in his arms, his tone a little floating. Since the King of Black Flame and others sincerely want to send a farewell gift, then I will accept it mercifully. By the way, tell the third team and the fifth team to evacuate immediately. there is no need to continue to collect information. Which, it's coming soon. Soon our long-cherished wish will come true. Ha 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 ha. After sending the black cat away in his arms, Takahashi Makoto said words of unknown meaning and at the same time let out a maniacal laugh that resounded throughout the empty room. The weekly magazine that published the final chapter of the comic Steins Gate was released as scheduled as usual. However, what surprises readers is that the comic Steins Gate alone occupies the space of 3 serial comics, which is used to serialize the comic manuscript of the final chapter. The male protagonist Rintaro Okabe saved his arrogant assistant who was doomed to death at the cost of his life, and finally reached the legendary Steins Gate world line. Neither Mayuri nor his assistant died, and human beings there is also a world line that can be called perfect in the future without being ruled by disaster. Well, in fact, what really surprised readers was that the manga artist Hohoin Kuma actually drew a happy ending that had never been seen before in the manga Steins Gate. However, after many cartoonists left messages, readers learned even more surprising news. Cartoonist Hohoin Kuma, after the manga Steins Gate ended, he quit the circle of cartoonists and gave up his career as a cartoonist. Then. Huh? Of course it has nothing to do with our editorial department. I still have to work, sorry. Yujiro hung up the phone fiercely, and immediately complained to his colleague Yoshida with resentment. What's that? Manga artist Howin Kyoma chose to retire because he was dissatisfied with the weekly editorial department. By the way, Yoshida-san, you should answer this kind of call next time. Yujiro, please make up a smooth excuse next time. Although he vaguely guessed what happened, Yoshida would not say it, at least not now. Because Mr. Howin Kyoma changed the style of his previous comics and gave a happy ending in the comic Steins Gate, and then immediately chose to give up the profession of cartoonist. Hattori, who had just finished a call with the readers of Resentment and Accountability, said helplessly, it's only natural that these two things that have nothing to do with each other would be linked together. Haha. Tisk, I was wondering why that guy Aiken, why is that guy so abnormal this time? Yoshida now finally knows why a certain Chuyunibu cartoonist didn't take any action according to the usual practice before. It turns out that the real pit has been set up long ago. By the way, what is Mr. Howin Kyoma going to do next? Yujiro suddenly changed the topic and asked Yoshida curiously. Of course, in order to show that he is a steady editor in charge, Yujiro immediately added after noticing Yoshida's strange eyes, I'm just asking questions on behalf of Nazuma Eiji, I'm not curious myself. A Chengai. As if recalling some unbearable experiences, Yoshida's face changed, and he gritted his teeth and shouted angrily, that guy is conducting research on demons. Research on demons. Yujiro and Hattori looked at each other and expressed their incomprehension. Until one day in the future, after spending all their monthly salary on Krypton gold card draws, Yujiro and Hattori truly realized how cruel Yoshida's so-called devil's research was. Last week, there were only 3 hours of rest time every day. I was working overtime, revising speeches, designing exhibition boards, and 4 people worked hard to complete an event from beginning to end. After finishing the work, I slept for 2 whole days before I recovered. I thought I would die suddenly from working overtime. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. A middle school cartoonist. Author, Mao Do Sde Mao. Chapter 728. Krypton money. Maybe you are the only one who can come up with such a crazy money-making model. Facing Makoto Takahashi, who was lying leisurely on the sofa, the heir to the game company's forgiveness, Jing Zonghao said with resentment, when I first heard you propose this idea, I was thinking, Chang, there is definitely a devil living in your head. Hey, Jisang, if you say this, won't your conscience hurt? In response to Uncle Jing Zonghao's complaints, Takahashi Cheng retorted angrily, you know you were the first to support me at that time. Oh man. And as far as I know, you sold the 4 limited edition Blue Eyes White Dragon cards for an incredible price. That's not because of the influence of animation. After a moment of unnatural silence, Uncle Jingzonghao hesitated again and again, and finally couldn't help but ask, speaking of which, Chang, have you really decided not to continue the series? Is it a comic? Searched Can on Google. Of course, I'm not that guy who starves to death without taking a bite of food, so of course what I said must count. Makoto Takahashi looked up at the wall clock on the wall, and took out a thick copy from the desk drawer. He planned thickly and handed it to Uncle Jingzonghao, who was full of doubts. This is the planning document for the new game. Hey, don't look at me with that look, Han Dan. Is it another work used to make money? After Uncle Jingzonghao took the planning book, he did not look through it in a hurry, but asked with great interest, it is still the same as the previous Yu-Gi-Oh! Style? Same. Does the game run simultaneously with the animation? Let the humans in this world feel the feeling of being so depressed that you vomit blood. Staring at the planning book in Uncle Jingzonghao's hand, Makoto Takahashi sighed with resentment. Although serialized comics can also I get enough pleasure, but compared to animation, it's better to play animation effects. Bang. I have already felt the malice emanating from your heart and soul, Aiken. After Uncle Jingzonghao complained, he began to look through the game planning book in his hand. Huh? Discharge Mouse Pikachu. Looks cute. Father, these are all drawn by me. Rin, who looked like a little cat, ran quickly from the study room to Takahashi Makoto with a small stack of comic manuscripts, holding up his work proudly. Putting on a look like, Dad, please come and show off to me, this is the follow-up story about the bald-caped man. Yeah, that's good, Rin. Takahashi Makoto reached out and rubbed Rin's head, and nodded with satisfaction, but Rin, I remember saying it many times. You have to always be elegant at all times. Hey, Rin reached out and snatched back the completed manga manuscript, turned around and ran to the study next to her. My stupid brother, sister, my manga manuscript has been approved by my father. Oh. Should I say that I am worthy of being your daughter? The style of painting is still the same as before, it maintains the ferocious demon nature of the cartoonist Phoenix Academy. Uncle Jingzonghao, who had just peeked at the comic manuscript out of curiosity, twitched the corner of his mouth. After a moment, he said to Takahashi sincerely, speaking of that kind of style, is he really a man? Essay, what path Rin will choose in the future is a matter for Rin to decide. Squinting his eyes and staring at the direction in which Rin was going, Makoto Takahashi said in a somewhat ethereal tone, if that child really chooses to become a manga in the future, isn't this a very interesting thing? Chang, could it be that you are? Uncle Jingzonghao, who seemed to have figured out something, suddenly changed his expression. Just when he was about to say something, he instantly felt the cold and piercing killing intent. Sometimes knowing too much is not something to show off. Because. Gently stroking the magic sword, Takahashi Makoto said methodically, curiosity may also lead to death. As expected, Chang, Oh, it's almost time, that guy should have arrived, right? Taking out a thick pile of manuscript paper from the drawer again, Takahashi Makoto began to issue an eviction order to Uncle Jingzonghao. By the way, Jingzonghao Hao Jisang, how long do you plan to stay here? Huh? Didn't I just come here for a while? Uncle Jingzonghao, who deliberately pretended not to understand the order issued by Makoto Takahashi, took a sip from the black tea on the table and said slowly, and here after reading the game plan you provided, I can answer any questions on the spot, right? It's up to you. Takahashi Chang pulled the white coat on his body and warned Uncle Jingzonghao with a serious expression, but if you dare to disturb my next behavior. Don't worry. My suicide note is ready. Faced with Takahashi Makoto's threat, Uncle Jingzonghao already knew how to resolve it. Humph. That's best. It should be here, right? The black-haired professional woman stood in front of the door, looked at it, and then confirmed the content of the small note in her hand. It's really unexpected. I didn't expect the popular manga from the weekly Shonen Jump is your home really? Excuse me, does Mr. Ji Zhen from Phoenix Academy live here? Yes, a group of good friends from Aiken Mumenjai were preparing. When they heard someone asking, they immediately turned around curiously and asked, "Excuse me, are you?" "Ah, excuse me. I'm Machida Sanako, the editor of the Fuzugawa Fantastic Bunko." After introducing herself, the editor named Machida Sanako asked the group of people in front of her curiously, "Excuse me, who are you?" "I'm from Eiji Nazuma." After answering the question, Eiji Nazuma immediately knocked on the door of Takahashi Makoto's house and shouted, "Teacher Howin Kyoma, we're here again." Eiji Nazuma, Machida Sanako felt like she had heard of this name before. After a little thought, a look of realization appeared on her face. Is it the popular cartoonist in Weekly Shonen Jump? Editor of the Fuzugawa Fantastic Bunko, Yashiro Mumenjai noticed Machida Sanako's profession, looked at each other, and then a yellow-haired man with glasses whispered to his good friend, "The editor of the light novel came to see Aiken. Could it be that guy Aiken?" It shouldn't be. Although he almost believed it in his heart, Landai still said stubbornly, "It's impossible for Aiken to change his job from a popular cartoonist to a light novel author. Akito, this should be impossible." "Nothing is impossible in the world, good friends." The one who responded to Landai was Takahashi Makoto, who had already opened the door. "It's a little later than the scheduled time, but forget it." "Well, although I have heard some rumors in the industry, but..." Looking at Takahashi Makoto in a white coat, Machida Yuanzi hesitated for a moment before slightly bowing. "You should be the author of my youth. The author of Haru Rena Monogatari is wrong, as expected. Howin Kyoma, right?" "Excuse me. I am Machida Sanako, the editor of Fuzugawa Fantastic Bunko." "Machida Sanako." Takahashi Makoto looked her up and down, and a look of realization appeared on his face. "Oh, you are the editor of Kazumi Shiko." "Huh? You actually know me?" Machida Sanako showed a hint of surprise on her face, and then immediately turned into a smile. "In that case, before talking about that, let me solve my personal problems first." Raising his hand to stop Machida Sanako, who wanted to continue talking, Takahashi Makoto looked at several friends on the side of the cartoonist, and a smile called joy appeared on his face. "The king of Black Flame, and my good friend Yajomumha, I already know why you are here. But as you can see, I have found a new toy now, so let's stop here. As expected, you are planning to develop in the field of light novels, Makoto." The disappointment in the eyes of the yellow-haired glasses man flashed away. "But we will not give up like this. So, do you plan to use the animated works to decide the winner?" Before the yellow-haired glasses man could express his thoughts, Takahashi Makoto, who had already predicted it first, immediately said, "I have no problem at all, but you should understand, right? The conditions for deciding the winner are no longer the previous level of serialization." "What? Teacher Howin Kyoma, are you looking down on us?" "I should be the one to say this, right?" Looking at the cartoonist whose obsession has completely transformed into fighting spirit, Takahashi Makoto showed a happy smile on his face. Are you looking down on the crazy novelist Howin Kyoma?" The whole book is finished. Thank you all readers for your continued support.